Hello, I'm Harry Riley. Welcome to Harry's 10-Minute Tales. This is called Butchered and Bled for a Loaf of Bread. It's a short story based on true events that happened a long time ago. I'm Julius White, partner of Nottingham solicitors, Whittle, Warble and White. My mother, bless her soul, had a fascination for notable Romans and named her 6 sons after them: Mark Antony, Augustus, Octavius, Nero, Tiberius and Julius, that's me. But that's by the way. Today, acting on client instructions, I retrieved a certain document from company vaults. In order to protect himself and his family from reprisals, the client insisted his sworn confession should not be made public until at least 100 years after his death. That time span has long since gone, so I will read it out, as written in his own words. My name is William Kirtley, known to my friends as Bill. I am a Nottingham coal miner. During the latter part of 1817, I appeared at the Derby Assizes, charged amongst others with seditious rioting and wanton destruction of valuable property during the so-called Pentridge Rebellion. I was found not guilty through lack of evidence and became a free man again, whereas many of my fellow accused were deported to the colonies, and our leader was executed in the vilest and most barbaric manner, hanged and beheaded, this being intended as a warning to others. If my testimony might appear to be above that of the ordinary mine worker, let me explain. My mother received a regular income from a private source, enough to clothe and feed us both, and to provide some additional private tuition throughout my childhood, so that we never went without or suffered the hardships of many of our neighbours. When I reached the age of 14 years, being then considered maturity of manhood, my mother explained a little more of our unusual financial circumstances. Before I was born, she worked at Nottingham Castle. The Duke of Newcastle owned the castle then. He was also Lord Lieutenant of Nottinghamshire. She claimed to have been tupped when in service by someone of his household. She stopped short of naming my father, possibly lest our money be taken away, but she let me believe I was the son of a very important man. The truth will never be known, as my mother has now passed from this earthly toil. Later, after starting work at our local pit, I was invited up to the castle for a secret meeting. It was here I was ushered into a grand room and met an awesome-looking man with deep piercing eyes. I knew instinctively he must be the Duke. When there were only 2 of us in the room, I was allowed to sit down and was then questioned by him as to my work at the mine. "You like working for a living and being the man of the house?" "Oh yes, sir," I proudly replied. "And you fit in with your workmates well enough?" I was puzzled by this question, but replied, "I hope so." He went on to tell me that he liked to help his ex-employees and that my mother had been well thought of during her work at the castle. She had been diligent and careful in her duties, and it was for this reason that we were of special interest to him. He said this financial help could continue if I was willing to carry on the good work from where my mother left off. "Yes, of course, sir. I can come and work at the castle tomorrow if you wish." No, I do not want that. He almost jumped down my throat. And then his face relaxed from the thunderous look he had given me, and he continued, "I have a very important task for you that will be a secret you must not divulge to a single person, not even your own mother. Could you handle that?" Again I was puzzled, but replied in the affirmative. "Ah, good man, this is what you must do." I was horrified as he went on to explain how I was to report back to him on a weekly basis. All the tittle-tattle that went on between the miners and the bosses at the pithead. This was to include even the social meetings. You mean I am to be your spy? Oh, no, sir, I couldn't do that. It would be a betrayal. This time he heard me out, and his voice became quiet and almost fatherly, as one might speak to a backward child. William, you are now grown up, and you will soon realise there are many bad men in this world who want to change things by violent means. They hide behind a cloak of secrecy, and are not easy to winkle out. It is my job to assist the government in finding those people, and I cannot do it alone. They will do anything to cause trouble and strife in the community. These are troubled times, and if the pits and the factories close down, we will all starve. There is one particular group known as the Luddites, who smash up new frame-making machinery in the cotton industry, and they are trying to secure support from the miners and anyone else who will listen. He paused as if his mind was elsewhere. This is where you could do a great service for me and for your country. Don't think of it as spying, but as worthy detective work for an honest man. If you ever hear the name of Jeremiah Brandreth, you are to tell me at once. Is that clear? I mumbled my acknowledgement, and he gave me a small bag of gold coins. This is for you and your mother. Keep it safe and do as I ask, and there will be much more for you in the future. I left the castle in a daze, and from that moment on I was the Duke's man, owned by him, body and soul. Every night my mother would smile as I wrote down in my diary. Every week my report would be passed on. It was the easiest thing in the world to spy on the colliers. I truthfully believe that no one had a glimmer of suspicion that I was any different to the rest of the hard-working, hard-drinking colliers. There were the usual gripes and groans about lousy conditions and food shortages, but nothing very serious. After the Battle of Waterloo, things began to get a lot worse for us all. The price of cotton went up, and bosses tried to cut costs by introducing new frames. This meant cottagers were no longer needed, and many local villages had no money to buy food. Men, women and children were starving in the streets. This sent ripples of anger throughout the whole of the Midlands and the North. My diary recorded the wild talk of our useless government. The monarchy, on the other hand, still led a lavishly decadent lifestyle, totally cut off from the reality of starving millions. This only made matters worse. It was then that a close friend of mine, another pit worker, Tom Pearce, introduced me and tore the pels to the Nottingham captain, Jeremiah Brandreth. It was one autumn evening at the Moon Inn, Eastwood, when this lean, dark-faced devil of a man came over to our table and began his talk of a British Revolution, overthrowing the government and kicking out the fat cats in Parliament. I'll never forget the way his fist suddenly came down on the table and he declared, "I say Jack's as good as his master. Leeds and Manchester are big providers of the nation's wealth, but have not got a single MP to represent them. And yet Cornwall has over 40 members of Parliament." He gave us each a pamphlet on which he'd written a short poem. It rang with stirring words like those from the Marseillaise, the moving anthem of the French Revolution. If I remember, it went like this: "Every man his skill must try, he must turn out and not deny. No bloody soldier must he dread, he must turn out and fight for bread. The time is come, you plainly see, the government opposed must be." We were all bewitched by his oratory and agreed to join his campaign. He was to lead a march on the very morrow from Pentridge in Derbyshire, through Eastwood and on to Nottingham, where everyone was promised 100 guineas to continue to London to overthrow the government. We had to furnish our own weapons and be prepared to use them against the soldiery and anybody else who tried to stop us. It was the only way to feed our starving children, he said. The time to act was now. The rest is history. I got word to the Duke, and the militia was ready and waiting, just beyond Eastwood. Most of the rebels cut and ran. The ringleaders were rounded up and thrown in jail. They claimed Jeremiah Brandreth had shot a farm worker, and he was hanged and his head chopped off. I reckon he was butchered and bled for a loaf of bread. A man called Oliver was said to be the real spy, and maybe he was, but I was paid as an unknown Judas and will carry the guilt to my grave. I often wonder how different our lives would have been if Jeremiah Brandreth had succeeded and become a new Oliver Cromwell. End.